Hey there, and welcome to my channel. This is part 5 of my DIY wood slat wall series where I'm sharing the entire process of building a wood slat wall in my home gym. This is the final video of this series, so if you've just stumbled upon this video, highly recommend you check out my previous videos as well. I'll link part 4 on the top of your screen here, and you can find links to my other videos down in the description box below. Okay, so it's been quite a journey getting to this point. All of the prep work, the cutting, the painting, and the staining has been done. Now it's time to finally start assembling everything together and see this vision come to life. Before we start nailing in our wood slats, the first thing I need to do is put up the mirrors, and that's where I ran into a few issues. Right off the bat, I realized that one of the mirrors wasn't in the best condition. It was showing signs of desilvering along the edges, which is when the reflectiveness of the mirror wears away. And this was happening on all 4 sides. So there wasn't an orientation I could install this mirror in that would make that less noticeable. On top of that, one of the mirrors wasn't exactly square, meaning that when we placed them next to each other, there was a 1/4 inch of a gap in between them at the bottom, but not at the top. And the face of the mirrors weren't flush with each other either. I also noticed that one of the mirrors was actually bowing away from the wall under its own weight. And I caught this when I noticed that my reflection looked slightly different in one mirror than the other. Kind of scary to think that glass has that much flexibility in them without shattering. And if those problems weren't enough already, it looks like a few of the clips were installed a little too high, so they will have to be adjusted lower. So there were a few issues that came up from these mirrors. Fortunately though, I was able to address all of them. Starting with the biggest issue here, which is the gap, to my surprise, this was an easy fix. To resolve the mirror, I adjusted one of the bottom clips just a hair higher, only about a 32nd of an inch. And surprisingly, that was enough to close the gap between them. But shifting the mirror this way produced this ugly pop out at the top here. So I'll have to deal with that in a little bit. Now to fix the mirror faces not aligning, I added 2 extra clips at the corner, so now they're holding the mirror tight against the wall. I also lowered the mirror clips at the top, so now they sat flush with the mirror's edge. Now to resolve the desilvering. I actually opted into installing a mirror trim. This will be installed over my mirror clips and go around my mirror like a frame. It'll hide all the desilvering at the edges and the center, and also hide the ugly pop out at the top. Of course, I had to mock this up with cardboard, and then I had my trim custom made by family, but these can also easily be found online and cut down to the size you need. Now, the last thing we need to resolve is the mirror bowing under its own weight. And an easy method is going to be just gluing the mirrors to the wall with silicone. It'll mean I won't be able to move these mirrors in the future without breaking them, but I don't think I plan to move them anyway, so that's what I'll plan on doing. Before I permanently glue these mirrors to the wall, I need to confirm their final placement will leave enough space on either side for my full height wood slats. So I created a mock-up using some tape and stuck on my shorter wood slats on either side. Doing a mock-up is important because ceilings, floors, and walls are rarely ever perfectly square. Once I'm happy with the spacing and placement of everything, we remove the mirrors one at a time. I place a dab of silicone at all 4 corners for added security, as well as the middle edges to fix the bowing issue. Once both mirrors are on the wall, I pressed against them with my body weight to spread out the dab of silicone behind it. I focused more effort on the center edges to help the mirror better adhere to the wall. Silicone takes a few hours to fully cure, so after a few minutes of pressing, I had to get creative with my stepladder and some weights to hold it in place throughout the night. And the next day, the silicone has dried and the mirror was no longer bowing. So my trims came in as bare metal, and I'm going to spray paint them a flat black for a modern look. I'm giving these a good wipe down using a wet towel and also a light sanding with 150 grit sandpaper, just to help the paint adhere better to the metal. These trims will get 2 coats of paint, and I'll let each coat fully dry before applying the next. While those are drying, I'm going to start working on my wood slats. I've already mocked up the slats on either side of my mirrors. Now I'm going to do the same with the slats below my mirrors. I taped all my wood slats up on the wall, and this showed me that the last wood slat would not have enough spacing. So that means if I shift the first wood slat over a bit, I should be able to get uniform spacing throughout. And this would also be true for the wood slats above my mirrors as well. In my last video, I removed the outlets to spray paint them black, so now it's time to reinstall them back on the wall. If you're unfamiliar with how to do this safely, I go over this in part 3 and part 4 of the series. I recommend watching both of them since I mentioned some important information to do this safely in both videos. After reinstalling the outlet, I tested the connection with a voltmeter. And as long as the meter reads above 120, the connection is good. I then installed my pass-through, and once I put the frames on, these looked amazing. The flat black really gave these receptacles a modern upscale feel. And you really can't tell that these were just spray painted. By now, our mirror trims have dried and they look just as good. I'll be gluing these on with silicone after the wood slats get installed, so I'm going to set these aside for now. So remember when I mentioned that walls, floors, and ceilings are rarely perfectly square? Well, that's exactly what happened here. And because of that, my wood slat measurements ended up being slightly off. This was expected, and after giving everything a trim off the end, and also removing the bottom strip of tape, my wood slat now fit perfectly. Getting this first wood slat right is the most important part because it'll determine the spacing of every wood slat after it. If it's off, the gap at the very end can end up looking too big or too small, and we don't want that. So I'm taking my time here, and I'm also using a level to make sure it's perfectly straight up and down. Then I'm going to nail it in place with my brad nailer. Once the first slat was in, it acted as a guide and made the rest of the slats super easy to install. And what made it even easier was that before installing, I had already numbered my wood slats on the back, so I know what order to install them in. That let me focus on installing without having to worry whether the color variations of the wood were balanced. To install these, I'm using a combination of brad nails and 2 dabs of liquid nails to hold everything in place. On my brad nailer, I found that lowering the pressure was the way to go. This prevented any of the nails from sinking in too deep and creating a dent. However, sometimes the nail wouldn't sink in all the way. To fix this, all I did was go back with a hammer and give it a light tap. This didn't damage the wood and made all the nails perfectly flush. When this side was finished, I followed the same process on the other side as well. Again, starting at the edge of the mirror and working my way to the edge of the wall. Here's a look at a brad nail that didn't sink in all the way. After a few taps with a hammer, it practically disappears. I didn't worry about the nails that were sticking out during my install. Instead, I focused on getting all the wood slats on the wall first, then came back at the end with a hammer to tap down any nails that weren't flush to the wall. Now moving on to the slats below my mirrors. I'm placing a bead of silicone along the back of my trim, and I'll be using the bottom slats to hold it in place. Before doing this, all my bottom slats have already been trimmed down to the correct length. That way I can install everything at one time while the silicone is still wet in case anything needed to shift. And spoiler alert, I did end up having to slightly move my bottom trim because it wasn't perfectly centered when I started to glue on my side trims. Now that the bottom slats are all in, I'm going to start gluing on the side trims. Since these metal trims are a bit heavy, I'm squeezing on a lot of silicone so there's no chance these will fall off. Once the side trims were in and held in place with tape, I followed the same process for the top wood slats, making sure to trim my wood slats first before I got started. And I didn't worry about getting my slats to fit around the receptacles just yet. I'll cut them to size once I've installed up to the receptacles. That way, I'll know exactly how many slats I need to cut. I definitely got my steps in during this part of the project. If you have someone who has time to help, highly recommend it, because they can just hand you the next wood slat as you go. Otherwise, I can guarantee that you will have a great workout. Once I got to the receptacles, I measured the space above and below each one, since measurements can be slightly different between them. Throughout the install, I made sure that the placements of the slat on top was matching the ones on the bottom. And so when it came to installing the last piece, everything fit perfectly. Now I went back through the entire wall with a hammer to make sure all the brad nails were completely flush. And after 24 hours of drying time, I removed the tape and gave the mirrors a good wipe down. The final piece before calling this project complete is going to be gluing on the center trim. I placed a dab of silicone at 12-inch intervals along the trim and slid this behind the bottom and the top trims. The tape wasn't strong enough to hold this in place, so again I got creative, and I gave this a full 24 hours to fully dry. And this is what the final result looks like. This is by far the biggest DIY project I've ever taken on, and I couldn't be happier with how it turned out. Honestly, it was a little nerve-wracking to get started. There were definitely moments where I questioned myself, but I'm so glad I committed to it and saw it through to the end. Now I actually look forward to working out in my home gym, and every time I walk in, I'm reminded that taking on the project was absolutely worth it. If there's one thing I hope you take away from the series, it's this. If you have a vision, just go for it. It might feel intimidating at first, but you learn so much along the way, and the end result is incredibly rewarding. I know I learned a lot throughout this project, and I hope you learned something too. If you've been following along from the beginning, thank you so much for being a part of this journey. And if you enjoy DIY projects, picked up a few tips, or just want to support the channel, I'd really appreciate it if you subscribed and gave this video a like. It really helps support the channel and allows me to keep creating more projects just like this. I already have a few more DIY projects planned, so be sure to subscribe so you don't miss my next one. As always, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.